This is special coverage from NPR News. The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York were attacked this morning. Hijacked airliners crashed into the buildings, causing 2 buildings to burn and then to collapse.
The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger.
President George Bush speaking to the nation a short time ago.
4 airplanes were hijacked today. Shortly after the World Trade Center was hit, another airliner crashed into the Pentagon in Washington, and a 4th plane crashed outside Pittsburgh.
We'll have reports from New York and Washington. We'll hear from witnesses to the attacks, and we'll have reaction from around the country.
First, we have the latest update on today's news.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Frank Stasio. President Bush called today's attacks on American targets in Washington and New York evil, despicable acts of terror. During a speech at the White House this evening, the president said the attackers did not achieve their goals.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong.
The president was in Florida when the attacks occurred. He was then flown to several locations today as the White House acted to protect him. Air Force One was given a military jet escort to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. The president was immediately surrounded by soldiers bearing automatic weapons and dressed in camouflage fatigues and helmets. He was then taken to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska before flying back to the White House this evening. It will be days, perhaps weeks, before the magnitude of today's terrorist attack on American targets will be known. The famous Twin Towers of the World Trade Center were destroyed, the Pentagon badly damaged, in a coordinated attack involving 4 hijacked commercial airliners. 2 planes slammed into separate towers of the World Trade Center within minutes of each other. Mark Benoit was on his way to work when he saw the crash.
What the first impact did, it drew people out into the street and the surrounding area. In the second impact, when that happened, everyone rushed away from the building because there was showering debris everywhere. As far as where I got out, 3 blocks south, it was hitting the street where I was. A shoe like 10 yards away from me fell. That's how, I guess, because of the force of the explosion.
90 minutes later, another hijacked American Airlines plane crashed into the Pentagon, causing extensive damage. The 4th plane to go down today was United Airlines Flight 93 en route from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. The plane crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and it came minutes after a man reportedly called an emergency dispatcher on a cell phone to say the plane he was on was being hijacked. NPR's Ken Barkas is at the scene of the crash in a remote area of south-central Pennsylvania.
I'm looking at a crater. It looks like about 15 to 20 feet deep, maybe 50 feet wide. There is just an amazing army of inspectors here and investigators, and everyone from postal inspectors to FBI, FAA, ATF, hazmat crews. There's cadaver dogs on the scene. One state police official who went to the scene said he did not see any piece left of the plane that was larger than a phone book. They say it's a huge crime scene area. They're considering a 3 to 5 mile crime scene area that they've cordoned off.
NPR's Ken Barkas. There were 38 passengers and 7 crew members on the United flight. Thousands of New York City firefighters and police officers scrambled to respond to the attacks. Many lost their lives when the buildings collapsed. An estimated 200 firefighters may have died, and as many as 80 police officers are believed to be missing today. Up to 11,000 firefighters eventually responded to the attacks. You're listening to news from National Public Radio.
It's 6:04. Time now for Arizona News. I'm Nelson Warnell. The Pima County Emergency Operations Center will remain open overnight, monitoring events at the federal and local levels following today's terrorist attacks. Patty Woodcock, Special Staff Assistant for the Pima County Department of Health Services, says no terrorist activities have been reported in the greater Tucson area, but the center will remain open through the night. Officials will evaluate the need for continued operations in the morning.
We have a meeting scheduled for later on this evening that will sit down and reevaluate staffing issues and look at the status of where everything is nationwide, and as things start to, depending on what happens, we'll predicate what happens here.
Woodcock says Tucson has been identified as one of the top 125 cities nationwide that are potential targets for terrorism, so city and county officials have been preparing for such an emergency. Tucson police are asking motorists to avoid the area around Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Traffic is heavily congested in the area, and police are telling motorists to avoid Craycroft and Gulf Links. Road closures are going up, and the only entrance into DM will be the eastbound curb lane. Greyhound has halted intercity bus service throughout much of the nation today in the wake of today's terrorist attacks. A spokeswoman for the Dallas-based bus company says all bus service has been canceled in the northeast of a line from Cleveland to Columbus, Ohio, Charleston, West Virginia, and Richmond to Norfolk in Virginia. Elsewhere, she says Greyhound has closed all of its terminals within 1 mile of federal office buildings. That has disrupted service to major cities throughout the nation. From the closure of Sky Harbor to intensified security at the nation's largest nuclear plant, the reaction was swift across Arizona to the stunning terrorist attacks. Military bases were placed on high alert. Many businesses, including all major shopping malls in the Tucson and Phoenix areas, closed in recognition of the magnitude of the disaster. The highway that passes over Hoover Dam on the Arizona-Nevada state line is closed. Updating Tucson weather, tonight mostly clear, a low in the low 70s. Tomorrow partly cloudy, a chance of afternoon thunderstorms, high in the upper 90s. Currently, skies are mostly clear. The temperature is 96 degrees on the campus of the University of Arizona. For KUAZ News, I'm Nelson Warnell.
This is special coverage from NPR News of today's terrorist attacks in New York City and in Washington. In Washington, I'm Noah Adams.
And I'm Linda Wertheimer.
And in New York, I'm Robert Siegel. Today, the United States was hit by the worst terrorist act in history. 4 commercial jets were hijacked and crashed into civilian and military targets, 2 into the World Trade Center in New York City,